How do you stay when you'd rather just leave? Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Navigate. I'm your host, Tim Austin, and today I'll be talking with Jennifer Davis. Jennifer is a former college classmate of mine who's been navigating a major transition season. She's a wife, a mom, and a pastor within the Assemblies of God movement. So thanks for listening in to part one of my conversation with Jennifer Davis as she tells her story and the process she went through, the process of staying well when life and ministry seems to be spinning out of control. Welcome, everybody, to Navigate Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Austin, and hey, I'm just really excited to have a friend and a former classmate.
Yes, that's true. It's true.
Yes, with me today. So we're going to be talking about, we don't really know what we're going to be talking about. This is kind of just, we'll see how it evolves, right?
That's right.
But some aspects of transition, I'm sure, and how that has impacted you. But let me tell everybody who you are.
Okay, that's a good idea. Yes, right. I'm the mystery voice.
The mystery voice.
Mystery voice.
Okay, I have with me Jennifer Davis, and it's still hard for me to put that last name on there because from our college days, university days, it was Gregory.
That's right.
Right. So Jennifer Davis is a college friend, and we went to university together, and at a small university called Bethany.
Yes.
University.
That's right. Scotts Valley.
Santa Cruz Mountains.
That's right. Beautiful.
Beautiful place. And so we do go way back.
Yes.
But as it usually happens, when you graduate, everybody scatters to the wind.
Yes.
And it's hard to stay in touch, especially when...
Well, we were pre-internet days,
That's true.
Right? We didn't have email. We didn't have cell phones.
Right.
We had to actually write letters, which, that was not my forte.
We were disconnected.
We were disconnected.
We were off the grid.
Off the grid.
But that was a good thing, I think.
I think so, too.
I really... realize that there was a lot of value in that.
Yeah, that's for another podcast. You could do a whole podcast just on that transition.
Yeah, for sure. So, but we did all scatter, and challenging to stay in touch, but from time to time we would connect during our furlough years and things like that when we were back from overseas. But it's been really cool because now you have moved closer to us.
Yes.
Tell us about this move.
Well, I would say, first of all, it's just so exciting to be here with you. And I think it's interesting that your transition and our transition, my family's transition, intersected.
Yeah.
And so I just continuously saying at home, I just feel so fortunate that at this season in life, almost 30 years after college, that we would be able to have close friends, literally down the street.
Cool?
It's wonderful.
So,
yeah, it's like a gift. You were on the other side of the world. So I was in Northern California, San Francisco Bay Area, the entire time in local church ministry.
Okay.
Pastoral ministry.
So you're a pastor.
Yeah, I'm a pastor with the Assemblies of God, and have always served in associate pastor roles in 3 different churches in Northern California. Actually, I should stop saying Northern California, just the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
And so you guys would come home to that area, and we'd be able to reconnect. Yeah. And that was great. But that's where I've spent all my post-Bethany days. Okay. Is with in Northern California.
Yeah. Cool. And so now, as of when you have moved closer.
Yes. So we live in Folsom now, Folsom, Sacramento region. And let's see, it's been a year. It's been almost exactly a year that my family made a decision that ushered in my big transition. I know that that's what we're going to talk about today, right? Transitions. Yeah. And I actually resigned my position. I was an executive pastor at Valley Christian Center in Dublin. And we prepared for that transition. And my last Sunday was the end of June. Okay. And we said goodbye to people that we had lived with and labored with and partnered with for years and years, and closed the door on just a really amazing chapter of life and ministry, and entered into my transition season. And actually ours is a family. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So it was you were transitioning from a really a long season of pastoral ministry and life and roots and community and all that in one
Absolutely.
area.
Yes.
And so that's big.
Yeah, it was huge. We actually had lived, the area we were in is called the Tri-Valley area, and we'd lived there for about 16 years. And just a wonderful community of churches in that area, all different denominations. Pastors have relationships with each other. We've done a lot of things. Our church had partnered with a lot of other local churches. I mean, you used the word roots. Our root system was definitely mature. Yeah. And this was a people we loved, a place we loved. Yeah. And, just to back up a little bit, everyone that faces some kind of transition. Right. It's either a transition that we initiate ourselves, right? Right. Or sometimes a transition is we're invited into a transition. I don't know how you would say that.
Yeah,
yes.
Invited. That's invited. A nice way of saying it. Sometimes I call them rug pulled out transitions.
Okay, yeah, that was, knock down the stairs transitions, This was one of those seasons that was so unusual for me. And in that, we were in a place that we loved. We were in a place that we'd fought for. We were in a place that had become healthy. It just had probably one of the most fruitful, peaceful seasons. Yeah. And what I began to sense was the Lord's invitation to make a transition. Okay. And, the season just prior to that was a little bit more challenging. And it would have been, I don't know, easier, maybe. The temptation to step out of the battle. Yeah. That sometimes leadership is a joy. Right. Leadership is sometimes, I don't know, I'm just seeing a UFC fight, in my head. Sometimes it's, takes its toll on us, those of us that lead in whatever area you lead in, whether it's business or in the church or in your home. There are seasons that are more difficult than others. And so I had this really intense, difficult battle zone kind of season, followed by a wonderful season where we got to see the fruit of all that labor. Okay. And so your transition wasn't a reaction to a really hard fight or battle or discouragement. No. It was coming out of that, but then into a really good season. Yes, a really great season. And it was so peaceful. There was such a sense of what's the word? I'll just stick with peace. Okay. That my family actually made a move during that time and purchased a new home. And we thought really at that point that we would be sticking around for a long time. It's like, hey, this is what we've worked so hard. We faced all these challenges. We, did all this work. Yeah. Now we can, kind of sit back and now we get to continue building from this point. But something shifted in me. And, people have asked me about this. Like, how did you know? How did you know it was time to step away? And I think one of the biggest challenges in leadership is to know, and I'll focus in on the church, in my experience, is to know your season, to know what season you're in, and to know, I think too often, because we don't understand the season that we're in, we leave too early or we stay too long. Right. And what I was beginning to understand, just from my time with the Lord and kind of paying attention to what I was seeing all around me
Mm-hmm.
was that my season and my assignment in that particular church was actually coming to a close.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of took me off guard at first.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, am I just experiencing a great honeymoon? Is the honeymoon coming to a close of this new peaceful season?
Mm-hmm.
So I just had to pray a lot, talk to my husband a lot, just processing what was actually happening. And what I realized was what I had been called to do was done. It felt a little bit like graduating, like when we were at Bethany together.
Yeah.
I remember that last semester, so much anticipation and excitement about the future, but like there was also it was bittersweet. We love this place.
Yeah.
We love our friends.
Right. It's again pulling up roots.
Yes, but it was time to do pull up roots. And so
So I want to get back to this. How do you know when it's time to go?
Yes.
To discern all of that, God's voice in that, God's will in that. But going back to when it was hard. Okay.
Yes.
Not to bring up, too many, but going back to when it was
PTSD.
hard. Yeah.
PTSD.
PTSD, right. But going back to when it's hard,
mm-hmm.
how do you discern what are some processes that were helpful for you? Because it is, like you said, a temptation to just want to escape.
Yes.
And not create a space, not give space for processing that hard season and then making a decision based on really, the confidence of, okay, this is God's will.
Yes.
Moving on or not. So how do you when it's hard,
how do you stay?
How do you stay? How do you stay well?
Oh, you know what? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so interesting. Let me go back. And if I start twitching, you'll just know.
You'll know.
No. You know what? Honestly, I think it's important to know that you are in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Period. Right? We have to know that, at least as believers, we have to know that this is my assignment. God's assigned me to this.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to stick with this until he says, let's do something different. I think I'm just really seeking, my theology is that we're partnering with the Holy Spirit in ministry. Yeah. So if he asks us to do something, he puts us in a situation and it's challenging, there's the temptation to walk away when it's difficult.
Right.
If you don't know that this is what you're called to do.
Yeah.
So I will say I had a deep sense of vision and a sense of responsibility. I think everyone hears from the Lord about their assignment differently, but the way I discern when the Lord's calling me to do something is I will have a vision for it and a sense of responsibility. Mm-hmm. That this is what I am supposed to be doing. So I had that. So there was, a lot of stress, misalignment,
mm-hmm.
Just organizational challenges that we're facing every day. And I really had to go into that portion, that season, we're talking about knowing our seasons, almost with a battlefield mindset.
Mm.
Now, we're not battling the people, but, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, right?
Yeah.
But against principalities, powers, etc. Yeah. So there are, the challenges of just humans working with other humans,
mm-hmm.
Personalities, etc.
Yeah.
But then that there's an actual resistance coming against you, and everything that you're trying to do to bring order and build a kingdom culture in this church environment, there's great resistance. So my mindset became, I've never served in the military, but I felt almost like a soldier during that season. And I found that I had to fight for I had to fight to carry peace. And so what that meant for me personally was getting up earlier and earlier and earlier. So my days would start at 4 a.m. And what I found was every day I needed to sit in the Lord's presence. I needed to worship him. It was not formulaic for me. Some days I literally was sitting in my, my prayer chair, just soaking in his presence and listening to worship. Some days I was devouring scripture. But I had to do something to connect my heart and align myself with the Lord every day so that I could keep his mindset and carry his peace. And I had to bathe myself in his presence every day. But that also meant every morning, I would exercise every morning. And there was that sense of the self-care of stress relief in a healthy manner. And so I think I probably was my healthiest
during that time?
During that season.
Okay.
Because, you're pressed on all sides. And it drove me. It was a great season of growth. It was a difficult season. But it was a great season of growth because it really drove me to seek the Lord as my source for wisdom, for peace. And then that working out every morning. I can remember learning to do a forearm plank, and holding it longer and longer and longer and longer. And there was really something to that daily discipline of, if I can hold this forearm plank for a minute, right? This is hard. I can face what I'm going to face today.
Right.
Yeah. And so what was I motivated by with that morning time to drive me to all of that discipline? I'd leave the house about 7:30. So it took me hours to prepare to leave.
Right. You knew where you're going into.
I knew what I was going into. And I knew it was absolutely essential that I kept a peaceful, I needed to carry the Lord's peace. I felt that it was every place I'd put my foot on that campus. We had a 49-acre campus. I knew I was carrying the Lord's peace into chaotic situations. So it
gave you a confidence in moving out. Those hours in the morning.
It did.
For you.
Well, and I will say, just, vulnerability with you and whoever's listening to this, that I was really concerned that given the immense pressure and the challenging conversations and everything, I was really concerned about losing self-control during the course of the day. And as ministers, we don't take the same oath that physicians do. We probably should first do no harm. But I knew the pressure that I was under. And the last thing that I wanted was to have my flesh come out. And, I'm from the East Bay area, and I didn't want to, go all East Bay on somebody because they, stressed me out or crossed me the wrong way. And so the only way that I could, one way that I could be more sure that wouldn't happen was to spend that time processing all my stuff so that later in the day, somebody else's issue didn't trigger my issue, Right?
And this just brings up a podcast I was listening to. Ruth Haley Barton has a great podcast called Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership. And she was just, I believe it was yesterday when I was listening to it, on one of her episodes, talking about strategic withdrawal. Like looking at that from, we often think with withdrawal as not being, if we just use it in certain contexts, we're not really thinking of it as strategic. But kind of, because you mentioned kind of the battle. So from a military kind of perspective, strategic withdrawal is very important. And she was talking about it in the context of retreat, maybe prolonged retreats, a few days or a week or a month or even more like in that sense. But I think even those morning times for you seems like they were strategic withdrawals.
Absolutely.
To step back
and
to rethink and re-strategize and be ready for the next.
And I think I'm talking about it in a very intense manner,
Mm-hmm.
and it was intense though, because when you are working in an environment that's facing any kind of crisis, it changes the rules a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
There's ebbs and flows in church life and organizational life.
Right.
And, in high stress times, your approach has to be different. The way that I had to live in that season, and that went on for a couple years. Mm. It was not sustainable.
Yeah.
And probably, anyhow, I was going to say contributed to, it definitely shaped who I am today.
Mm-hmm.
I feel grateful for that season.
Okay.
I had to have more of a survivalist mentality, and really prioritize. I had to prioritize my relationship with the Lord and my relationship with my family, and then my relationship with the church and schools that I served. And during that season of life, I said no to like everything else, invitations for social events and I don't think that's healthy as a way of life, but I can say that coming through that season, was able to do some of the most, fruitful work probably of my entire ministry. And my relationship with my family deepened with my husband. We have one son. With my son, we really kind of cocooned together. But I don't think it's healthy to work that way for prolonged periods of time. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I think some people do approach all of life and all of ministry. Yeah. In that battlefield mindset.
Right.
My son and I were just talking about that, how workaholism, isn't a virtue and, something to aspire to. And yet in our culture, even our Christian culture, so often we, can be very performance based and, right?
Yeah.
And, anyhow.
Yeah. There's so many things that can steer us off course, like just the whole people pleasing approach, and I'm here to serve, and we just go and don't run run ourselves empty, and so sustainability, that whole long-term sustainability piece.
Adrenaline, we can get really addicted to adrenaline. And, there was a high. There's almost a high. I mean, I can remember, like, the night before, the next day I'd get, my phone would remind me, you have 14 meetings tomorrow, and life just, I ran at such a clip that, I think that's why my morning time was so grounding for me, because, I don't know, there's just an adrenaline that you fly on, and, grounding myself in the Lord's presence, and having, like I said, like even exercising and experiencing, you have an endorphin rush, which is very healthy, was good, but I could see how, I don't know, you just become very addicted to that pace.
Yes. Yeah,
right.
But for you to step back in those morning times and to just recenter, refocus on, and I think that there's a lot around, for me personally, when I'm in those kinds of seasons and I step back, and for me it might look like, we live in the mountains, so getting out in nature and walking my dog in the woods or whatever. But it takes that for me to kind of re-center myself in God's purpose.
Yes.
And who I am in Him.
Yes.
And not the, on one side, the criticisms or the accolades, on the other side, or whatever I'm getting or receiving from people.
Yes.
Who I am.
Yeah.
In that. And so that brings us into a place of where we are able to serve out of that source rather than just all the time, like you said, adrenaline, but long term, how is that going to sustain us? Yeah,
exactly.
So,
yeah.
Well, okay, so that was kind of that's why I wanted to go back there to that hard place and how you stayed.
Yeah.
And made that decision to stay. And it sounds like, what I'm hearing is that was a big part, just being able to increase your time with the Lord, just to really focus in on Him, having conversations. Were there any other things, like key conversations you had with people? Like, were there any pivotal points that, well, number one, how close did you get to saying, I'm out of here? And were there any key pivotal points there, like conversations or anything that really turned the...
I can say that there was a point where I felt like maybe the work that I was doing was futile. Mm-hmm. And probably any of us, any leader that's, yet to experience a breakthrough. Right. Has probably asked themselves the same question. Yeah. And, there was a point where I thought, let's just leave it at that. That it felt like maybe this is futile. Maybe the change that we're working for isn't going to happen. Maybe, maybe my labor here is in vain, And so I think primarily most of my conversations were probably with my husband. Yeah. And we would talk together and process together. And I think I'm trying to remember, I blacked it all out. No, I'm just kidding. I can remember getting to the point when it was just before the dawn. Yeah. And we were very much prepared to step away. Mm-hmm. It was like, this is not sustainable. Mm-hmm. And things aren't going to change. Yeah. Now I realize, wow, I was a little discouraged. Yeah. Probably discouraged and tired. Mm-hmm. Really tired. And then, I can remember clearly, some decisions were made. The board made some decisions, and suddenly everything snapped into place. Everything wasn't fixed or mature, but the alignment came. And it was like a complete shift in the atmosphere. I can still remember where I was. And I attended a meeting. There was a group of us, all the senior leaders, key people were in a room together. We had to make some more difficult decisions. Right. But what was different about this moment is alignment had been... I don't go to the chiropractor. Do you go to a chiropractor? I know. I don't. I have friends, like, they swear by it, right? Yeah, yeah. But they're like, I had a problem. Ache, pain. I went to the chiropractor, and now I'm back in alignment, right? So... there was alignment organizationally and in the spirit. And I think the alignment in the spirit came first. And then, you make the organizational decisions to match that. Yeah. And I remember sitting in this room and, suddenly it was like from the Wizard of Oz. And remember, everything was black and white. And then she opens the door, everything's in color. And suddenly... there was oxygen in the room. It was completely different. Yeah. And I called Dwight's my husband, and said, honey, it's not time to leave. And it was like, I felt like, I've told friends that I felt like the Lord physically put a new coat on me. It was like he put a new garment on me. And it was his grace for the remainder of that season. Yeah. And I went from feeling like maybe this is futile to seeing the breakthrough and really understanding that my assignment wasn't over. Okay. Yeah. and even facing some things that I wasn't at all interested in doing, 3 days before, to knowing I now have vision and a sense of responsibility. And it was the enabling, empowering grace that came from God. And that's what he does for us. He calls us to something and he empowers us to do it.
Yeah.
It was so powerful.
Yeah. And you gave time for that shift to happen. And I think that's really key. Like when we're going through big transition seasons or things that look like a big shift in life or ministry or just stressful times that kind of tempt us to flee,
Yes.
Take the time. There's a lot to be said, right, about perseverance, but just take the time to endure, to really find ways to create space to hear God's voice in that.
Yes.
And to make a decision based on that rather than the moment.
Yes.
So good.
So that from that moment on, really experienced what I said at the beginning of our talk was that it was the season of peace.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing. Yeah. And I'm so grateful. I didn't leave. I'm so grateful that I didn't leave. Because even this week, I was exchanging emails with my former lead pastor and probably our key elder, and we were emailing each other back and forth this week, and my relationships are intact. Which is what it's really about. We're the family of God. And, people say, oh, the church isn't a business, or, well, the church is a business. There's that tension, right? Yeah. But I think because the Lord helped us stay when it was difficult, he was able to crush, you know what I mean? Crush, allow the crushing to happen, and develop. But then there was, I just listened to Christine Kane talk about this. She talked about being willing to go into the dark room and be developed. And when there's a crushing, you crush olives. Right. There's olive oil. You crush, how do you get new wine? You crush the grapes, and it's that crushing that then she was talking about how the crushing produces or makes way for the anointing to come. Right? And it's the anointing that breaks the yoke in people's lives. I know I listened to it over and over again. Good. I still can't say it like she said. You can listen to her yourself. But if I hadn't continued to yield in that process, I wouldn't have grown. It was hard. It was really hard. Right.
And those relationships were preserved and strengthened. And I think that's what we see so often when we endure through hard seasons with coworkers, teammates, colleagues, fellow journeyers in ministry. We those bonds of relationship just are strengthened.
Absolutely.
And so we just had kind of the same experience where we've been back in the States for 3 years now after living and serving in Turkey, but we just got back from a trip to Turkey, and those relationships, because we left well, to the best of our ability. And God gave a lot of grace through that process. Because we were able to leave well, we can go back and just the
bridge is still intact.
The bridge is still there. The relationship's intact, and it's healthy and it's good and it's actually life-giving.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And I think that's as far as it depends on you. I know that, someone, I was having a conversation with someone the other day about, and they said, well, when you leave so that you, in such a way so that you can always come back.
Absolutely.
And that's true. If, as far as it depends on you, we want to do that. Right. In some contexts, it's not always possible, but that's a good approach to think in that way, because you're valuing relationship above the mess, you know, like, okay, what's important here?
Yeah.
That's good.
I remember walking around the campus in those months that followed and experiencing the peacetime versus wartime, right? And still lots to do, lots of culture shaping in that next year was really essential. And, but one day I realized that the coat was coming off. It was like, almost like when you've got your winter jacket on and then you go outside and you realize, oh, it's warm. I don't need this anymore. And you stop even taking the jacket in the car just in case you need it, because you know you're not going to need it. Right. And I realized the grace was lifting.
I love to hear Jennifer talk about the place in transition when alignment finally came. And with that alignment came a renewed sense of hope and God's grace to finish well. As in Jennifer's case, the grace for enduring a difficult season may eventually lift, but it never lifts completely. His grace is always there to see us through the next season. And rather than signing off in my usual way today, I'd like to read this prayer by Mary Mrazowski, which just might help you lean into God's grace, the grace He has for you in this particular moment, in this transition season. I recommend it as a regular practice because oftentimes during transition seasons, we can come with a defensive posture. We can come with a lot of pent-up frustration and an agenda before we even hit the ground running. And it's during times like these when we need to pause and step back and recenter ourselves in God's grace. So let me just read this prayer to you as a way to close today. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome everything that comes to me in this moment because I know it is for my healing. I welcome all thoughts, feelings, emotions, persons, situations, and conditions. I let go of my desire for security. I let go of my desire for approval. I let go of my desire for control. I let go of my desire to change any situation, condition, person, or myself. I open to the love and presence of God and the healing action and grace within. Thanks so much for joining me today for this episode of Navigate. I've been your host, Tim Austin, and if this has been helpful to you, would you mind rating the podcast, writing a review, and sharing on social media? And of course, you can always subscribe so that you're sure to get in on the next episode, and I'll see you next time.